Welcome back to Rarest Photos. Well, you asked for it, so I'm going to do it. We're going to read Are You Lonesome Tonight again, but we're going to do it in bigger sections, okay? So you don't have to keep up with so many different, in a sense, chapters or sections. This is my goal. So this book is 294 pages long. My goal is to do it in 5 or less videos, okay? So we will read it, okay? I'll bring up some of the stuff that y'all, the subscribers, have found on your research. Some of the stuff I've found as well, but mainly y'all. Okay, I did spend quite a bit of time looking for stuff, but Sandy Kirkendall has been amazing. Josie Jones has been great out there doing stuff. Tammy's been phenomenal, and it's not Tammy Fassia, I think her last name is. And Janine has been great as well. Y'all have been finding stuff left and right, and of course, I think Elvis showed me a few things on the Elvis and Gladys is one of them. We heard something from Rhonda McDowell that confirmed something that was in the Elvis and Gladys book. And of course, you know, the author is a New York Times selling author, Derry Matera. And he did all the research too. And we have 5 handwriting experts that verified that this poem was written to Lucy DeBarban and that she had this romance with Elvis and a daughter with Elvis. As Derry says, the greatest gift of all that Elvis gave to her was Desiree. So thank you for all y'all that have subscribed. Thank you for all of y'all that are going to watch these videos and those that make it to the end, M-I-T-T-E, or survive it till the end, right? And I'm excited to do this for y'all, okay? I'm going to read, now this is the book club edition. I'm going to read the inside cover. Derry was a little not disappointed, I guess a little disappointed that his picture was left off of this. But you know what, maybe he chose to have it off. I don't really know. What I do know is that it's an amazing book, and so far, and we'll have to go through it together again. So far, everything I've seen is plausible. We're going to talk about Bill Burke again. Bill E. Burke, the author that wrote the absolute trash review of Are You Lonesome Tonight, that had no facts to it, that made up stuff that was never in this book, and put it out there for everybody to see, to pick it apart. I almost want to thank him, actually. It makes this book seem even more likely. And I have to say this, Derry, you know, he gives me a hard time about it. But I wasn't there. I wasn't there during the relationship. I wasn't there during the conception of Desiree. I was not there during the birth. I was not there during all the visits that Lucy and Elvis had. But I do choose to believe that Lucy is an honest person. And if Lucy is an honest person who raised all these children, and they all grew up to be good people from what I've seen, then I got to choose to believe her, that this is true. And that's where I begin with it. And that's where we're going to begin. We're going to start reading right after this. So here's the introduction. On a cool night in Memphis, high on a grassy hilltop, Elvis Presley fell in love with a beautiful French teenager with sparkling green eyes, a melting smile, and a haunted existence. This love ignited a passionate romance hidden from the world for 24 years. When they met in 1953, Lucy DeBarban was a troubled 16-year-old who begged God nightly to free her from a physical and psychologically tortured life. Elvis Presley was an 18-year-old dreamer filled with an intense desire that would fuel an unparalleled rise to fame, fortune, and eventually to a legendary status too heavy to bear. Their love was born of necessity, grew in secrecy, and was fraught with impossibilities. Yet for nearly a quarter of a century, it remained unbending. Elvis inspired Lucy to shake off the chains of despair and hopelessness and free herself from a brutal husband foisted upon her at age 11 by an old world immigrant family. She repaid him by sacrificing herself and her love so he could initially achieve and then maintain the fame he cherished. She gave birth to his first child, but her desire to shield Elvis from scandal forced her to conceal their baby and to conceal the father from the child. The single legacy that Lucy allowed their daughter was her name, Desiree. This was the endearment Elvis bestowed upon Lucy, the name he chose as the most romantic way to express his love. Though Lucy ran from Elvis to protect him, he always found her. They met secretly in parks, by the banks of rivers and ponds, and in hotel rooms across the country. They talked, they laughed, they cried, they made love, and they prayed for a future together. When the roles were reversed and Elvis was emotionally crumbling, Lucy was there. Her love comforted him in the fog of his final years and provided an intermittent oasis that might have given Elvis the only peace he ever knew. But Lucy's scars never completely healed. Driven by her protective instincts and terrified by a past that could never be forgotten, she delayed in agreeing to the marriage Elvis had intently pursued from the beginning. Now, after a decade of guilt and anguish, Lucy wants to tell her daughter the story she never has been able to voice. A heartbreaking recounting that reveals who Elvis Presley really was. Through Lucy's eyes, we learn his deepest longings, experience his greatest victories and painful disappointments, and finally understand why he was so lonely, unhappy, and empty. Are You Lonesome Tonight is a tragic and touching love story, the most compelling portrait of the king that's ever been published. Then it talks about Lucy DeBarban lives in Texas, where she currently works as a clothing designer. A mother of 6, Lucy was selected to appear in Notable Women of Texas of 1983. Then Derry Matera was formerly an editor with Rodale Press and reporter for the Miami News. He lives in Miami. Now, I know that some of y'all looked to see if you could find Notable Women of Texas of 1983. It said she was selected to appear. I don't know whether she did or not, but we do know that they would have fact-checked that. They would have found out whether it was true or not. 1987, and that's very important as well, that this book was published in 1987, because it doesn't copycat any of the other books that might have some of the same information that I've seen. I've seen some of the same information in June Wanico's book. Not saying she copycated, but the thing is that the information that's in here is also in there in some places. But that was 10 years later, 1997. This is 1987. Elvis and Gladys came out. What year is this? Okay, 1985. Okay, so I wonder if Derry did some research as well, because first off, everybody, and of course I try to be as transparent as possible when I read these things, look at these things, but everybody shoots holes in some of the parts of this book that are actually verified in this book. So nobody ever talks about how Elvis and Gladys is inaccurate. And this is not the only place that some of the information is at as well. So so let's get to reading. We are going to skip through the acknowledgments and the preface. Okay? We should probably just do that in a section towards the end. Okay. Introduction. I wish I could have foreseen the horrible end to Elvis's life. Maybe I could have helped him hang on a little longer. Then again, maybe I was part of the reason he did the things that led to his death. I don't know. Looking back, that is what hurts me the most. Not knowing. I hope God will forgive me if I made the wrong decisions. I would have liked nothing better than to have been Elvis's wife. He asked me many times. It would have been easy to think only of myself and run to him. I wanted to, but I couldn't. There were too many people who would have been hurt. Now, I never gave up hope of being with him. You see, I loved him so much. The only thing he and I treasured was our ability to keep our love alive through all the troubled years. I blamed so many for what happened to Elvis. Those around him were supposed to protect him and take care of him. Instead, they hurt him and allowed him to hurt himself because he was so trusting. He was sensitive, and those who betrayed him injured him more deeply than anybody ever knew. Each friend who turned his back cut a piece out of Elvis's soul. Now I played my part, said Lucy. I hid a secret from him that nearly destroyed us both. Or maybe it did. I don't know. I tried to run away. I hid. I tried to protect him. I did everything I could except for one thing. I never tried to stop Elvis from loving me. I just couldn't. I needed him so much. He was a man beyond the image that everyone saw. The only man I could love without being afraid. Before him, I was so afraid. He came and took the pain away. He was strong, indomitable, and sure of himself and his beliefs. He was tender, kind, gentle, and loving. See, he was my lover, my inspiration, and my deliverer. He had his faults, I won't try to deny that. But they were so few and small compared to his goodness. And we've lost sight of that now. We've allowed some bitter people to distort our view of him. What he did for me, what he was to me, reveals the man he really was. Now there remains a wonderful joy to hold on to, my daughter Desiree. She's grown so beautiful in body and spirit. She reminds me so much of him. She wants the identity I denied her for so long, and I worry about her. She's so much like her father. She listens to everyone. She's much too trusting. And underneath her glamour lies a weakness, the same weakness that destroyed him. It's the sweetness that makes her give of herself and allow others to take. It's hard to explain, but I can see it. Those who are close to Elvis will also see it. I'm so afraid someone will hurt her. See, she's been hurt enough. I've hurt her. I only hope she knows that I was acting out of love. And I pray that she'll understand why I never told Elvis about her, or why I never told her about him. I thought I was protecting them. I thought I did the right thing. I'm not sure anymore. See, I recently dreamed that I was with Elvis again, and when he was struggling to launch his career. I was back with the real Elvis, the young man I knew at the beginning of the road, the boy with a quick smile and the beat-up guitar. He had a zest about him, a determination that would not be denied. Even when I'm awake, so many things remind me of him. I will never look at a star at night without thinking of Elvis. Falling leaves, green hills, autumn. It all reminds me of him, and I hear his haunting voice on a distant radio station. I see his image laminated on wood at the county fair. Late at night, I turn the channel of my television set and see him singing and dancing through one of his movies, happy and carefree. It's almost as if he's still with us. Except the phone. It's silent. There are no more midnight calls with him sky high over his latest success, ranting about whatever upset him, or wallowing in despair over some minor defeat that he took much too hard. His image remains, but Elvis is gone. I realized that I will be judged for my actions. I know people will look to see what part I played in his decline. Please try to understand I did what I thought was best, not for me, but for him. I always put Elvis first, and I need everyone to understand that, especially his fans, all of you, who didn't know Elvis but loved him as if you did. I was among the fans at Graceland when he died. I, too, was on the outside. I saw the pain in your faces and tears streaming down your cheeks. You really cared and you cried with me. It gave me comfort. Recalling my past has not been easy. Some of it is ugly. I held it inside so long and I banished it from my memory so I could heal. I pretend that the nightmarish images have slipped away. They fade, but they never go away. The memories of Elvis help, but now even they bring pain. My love is as intense as it was in 1953 when Elvis and I met. I thought that too would fade, but it hasn't. My grief remains as deep as it was in 1977 when suddenly he was gone. The tears come less frequently now, but they've never stopped. Even though I'm aware that I'll be judged, I have to tell the truth, all of it. An altered account would deceive not only the public, but my daughter as well. I can't do that. The only reason I've agreed to open up is to give my daughter a sense of her father and what we had, and to explain to her why I did the things I did. My daughter must know exactly how it was. The good times and the bad, the passion and anger, his few faults and my many faults. Desiree, my darling, I owe you this story and give it to you out of love. I kept it from you far too long. I've made you frustrated and angry, I understand. In a strange way, I respect you for that. Build strength around your anger because you are going to need it. Are you lonesome tonight? 1939 to 1947. So a little background on Lucy. I remember the fire. It was one of my first memories. I was 3 years old. A crowd of relatives had gathered in the front yard and stood quietly under the tall oak trees. I saw some men splash a liquid around the base of our 2-story wood frame house. A thin man threw a torch upon it and quickly jumped back, and I heard a whoosh and felt the heat against my cheeks as the fire devoured my home. No one tried to put it out, and I held onto my mother's leg and stared into the bright orange flames, wondering what it all meant. Everything had happened so suddenly. The memory is a blur of sounds, people, and colors. My father had just come home from a long trip. We had the unusual feast to celebrate his return, and afterwards the children were shooed upstairs so the grown-ups could drink and carry on. And I was still awake when the party ended, too excited by the noise to sleep. I crept downstairs and saw my father sitting in his rocking chair. He spotted me, smiled, and outstretched his arms, and I ran to him and jumped in his lap. My older sisters later described my father, Alfred Joseph de Barbin, as a handsome, tall man with blue eyes and thick, grayish blonde hair. He was always well dressed, usually in a 3-piece suit accented by a dangling gold chain that led to the pocket watch he carried in his vest. Now, he often tied a colorful cravat around his neck and was fond of knee-high boots, which he kept shiny and polished. He was born and raised in Paris, and some members of his family were said to be prominent in the French government. In the early 1900s, a large group of my ancestors from both sides came to America and settled in Boston. My father met my mother when he was in his late 40s and she was only 16. They were opposites. She was just petite and under 5 feet tall, with pale blue eyes set off by black hair that hung past her waist when she combed it out each night. During the day, she wore it knotted at the nape of her neck in a chignon, maybe, Chignon, that was held in place by 2 large tortoiseshell hairpins. Both families scorned their marriage. His people didn't think mother had the proper breeding. Her family was from Nice and believed that anyone from Paris was a scoundrel. Besides, he was much too old. Despite these misgivings, the marriage was solid. Mother had 13 children, though only 7 survived infancy. I was the last daughter and next to the last child. My family was part of a splinter group that migrated from Boston to Chalmette, Louisiana, a small French enclave, a few miles from New Orleans. My great-grandfather, Louis James Bellevue de Barbin, had set off an earlier wave of immigration when the French government sent him to Louisiana as a munitions and custom official during the colonization in the 1700s and early 1800s prior to the Louisiana Purchase. Many of his descendants chose to settle in Chalmette and New Orleans rather than return to France, so we were among friends and relatives. My father served as a county sheriff for a while and later had an interest in a cattle ranch in Houston that forced him to travel frequently. He was 75 when I sat in his lap that night, but I had no conception of age. He was energetic and quick to laugh or sing. He was proud of his French heritage and made all of his children learn French before they learned English. French was the only language I knew at the time, and it was the only language my mother ever spoke. That night, as he held me on his lap, he said, "Ma petite fille, you're going to be a beautiful woman one day and sing like a nightingale." He started to hum after the ball was over and said, "Ma chérie, sing with me." He sang it a few times, and I tried to parrot the English lyrics. All of a sudden, though, he started coughing violently. He ordered me to get him some water, and I ran to the kitchen, but couldn't reach the faucet. I ran back to tell him, but someone grabbed my shoulders and held me back. I peeked around their legs and saw my mother sitting on the couch with my father's head in her lap. She was hugging him and crying. My father is no longer with us. I found out later that he had tuberculosis. I messed up the first time I read it too. Tuberculosis. That's a better way of pronouncing it. Tuberculosis. As was the custom among the French immigrants, the relatives burned down our house the next day, thinking it would stop the spread of the disease. I had not only lost my father, but my home as well. The family was placed under the dominated hand of my stern maternal grandmother, Alicia Lachenier Lugnol. She was a heartless old woman, permanently unhappy about being uprooted from her beloved niece. Nice, I think that's how you pronounce it. She hated America and Americans. She shrouded herself in mourning clothes, long black dresses, and black bonnets, and peered down at us through wire-rimmed glasses. She walked with a cane, which she brandished about while condemning everyone to Hades. My grandmother had never stopped hating my father, and that hatred spilled over to his children. We immediately became disposable. So Lucy was 3, it seems to be, when her father passed away. And she saw her father pass away, which is sad. Similar in a sense to Lisa. Lisa Marie seeing her father pass away too and being held back. We had so much when my father was alive. The house was large and well furnished. We never wanted for anything. After he died, everything vanished in the fire. Anything else he had was confiscated by my grandmother, and my family became impoverished overnight. My grandmother forced my mother to work as a common maid and sent my 5-year-old sister Mary and me back to Boston. So it seems that her sister Mary was 2 years older than her. So if Lucy was 3 and Mary was 5, I think that's the same Mary that we're going to read about later, that in a sense introduced Lucy to Elvis. Not the first time, but the second time. Let's keep that in our memory. My younger brother and 2 sisters remained in Chalmette. I never knew why we were separated, but even at that young age, I sensed that my grandmother disliked me most of all. She said, "Your parents both have blue eyes, but you have green eyes," she told me once. "That's a sign that you are evil." So, Lucy had green eyes. There's a lot of people that argue over her eye color and Elvis's eye color. And whether somebody with green eyes and somebody with blue eyes could have a child, which Desiree has hazel eyes, which is a combination of green, brown, and blue. And I believe when we looked it up, you could have recessive genes, and you could have a child with hazel eyes if the father had blue and the mother had green. In Boston, we moved in with a widow named Nini Shador, a kind woman in her 60s. No one explained who she was, although I do recall someone saying that she was the wife of one of my father's brothers. So it would be a kind of an aunt. We called her Tanti Nini. She lived by herself in a magnificent 3-story house that was so tall I could see the lights of the city from my bedroom window. Now, despite the pleasant surroundings, I was unhappy about being away from my own family. When I was 5, I went on an outing with some older girls from the neighborhood. We were riding on a horse-drawn wagon in the country, making stops to gather flowers. I took off my shoes and sat on the wagon, dangling my feet over the side. The girls made me promise to sit there and not move while they ran off to play. Well, I quickly became bored and decided to jump into the muddy water a few feet away. When I landed, I felt a sharp pain in my foot, and I stepped out and discovered that my foot was bleeding. The girls ran over and pleaded with me to stop crying. They told me not to tell anyone what happened. As the months passed, the pain in my foot increased. The girls were still afraid of getting into trouble and repeating their request that I not tell anyone. I obeyed, and I withstood the pain. Shortly after, Tante Nini told me I was too serious and sad for a child and sent me back home to my mother. I was pleased, but the pain in my foot tempered my happiness. Back in Chalmette, I attended a convent school and began limping. I was soon unable to even wear a shoe on that foot because it was swollen and sore. The other kids at school thought I was a cripple, and they avoided me. With no friends, I turned my attention to schoolwork, and I studied hard, and I won some merit awards. I learned English, but found that it was my foot, not my language, that scared the other children away. I continued to endure the pain because of my vow to my friends in Boston. I didn't want to get them in trouble. My uncle Geoffrey Bellevue de Barbin arrived unexpectedly from France one day. He was a jolly man who looked a lot like my father, except his hair was darker, and he sported thick, bushy sideburns. He was a doctor and asked me in French about my foot. I decided to confide in him. I told him about jumping off the wagon into the muddy water. He examined the scar and told me that there was something inside that must be removed. He convinced my mother to send me back to Boston so he could operate. Now, when he opened my foot, he found a green thorn. It had entered near my toe, and in the years since the accident had traveled almost to the center of my foot. He said it was a miracle that I didn't lose my foot from infection. I was elated because not only was the pain gone, but more important, I could wear a shoe. I could become just like any other kid, and I wouldn't be shunned anymore. Free from the pain and stigma, my personality began to blossom. I soon had many friends, and my mother continued working as a maid, cleaning churches and large houses, scrubbing floors, washing windows, and working herself to the bone. She would come home exhausted and depressed, and she never smiled anymore. I knew her opportunities were limited because she couldn't speak English. My father's last words about me growing up to be a beautiful singer when I was 3 stuck in my mind. I wanted to be successful so I could help my mother. I practiced singing every day, learning everything from opera to popular tunes. I learned to control my voice and to alter the tones. When I was 11, the nuns at the convent asked me to sing in a large, beautiful church, St. Anthony of Padua. I sang high soprano solos in Latin at Mass. One day, the house mother told me that my grandmother had come to see them. They said that I would be moving away soon, and I couldn't believe it. Here I was finally settling in somewhere, and I had to leave again. When I got home, there was a party going on. The house was full of strangers, mostly men. A well-dressed woman introduced herself and told me to call her Aunt Victoria. After dinner, I was asked to sing, and that was the routine at our parties, and I loved performing. I had recently learned the song Mother Machree and dedicated it to my mother. I could see the tears in her eyes as I sang. Now, she told me later that the strangers were friends of my grandmother and had come to visit because of me. They were interested in helping me study music. They would furnish us with a nice home, and things would not be as hard anymore. My mother could give up her terrible job, and I was thrilled. I was only 11, and already my singing had helped. A few days later, my mother went off to live in a wonderful new home in Monroe, Louisiana. I was put in the care of Aunt Victoria. She was about 40 and tall, with short, curly black hair. She was obviously wealthy because she had a closet full of fur coats and adorned herself with diamond rings, earrings, and necklaces. She began dressing me in her image. I loved the new clothes and acted out fantasies in the mirror, playing the part of a sophisticated lady out on the town. My hair was long and black like my mother's, and I experimented with different styles. Now, Aunt Victoria caught me primping one day and said, "Lucy, you're a very pretty girl, and you're large up here. You look older than you really are. Some young man might be interested in you. Don't tell anyone how young you really are." I didn't like that. I was self-conscious about this area. I wanted to look like my friends. Their bosoms were flatter, and they could wear smock dresses. I was always trying to hide my figure under baggy clothes. 2 weeks later, Aunt Victoria said that my grandmother was coming to discuss my future. She arrived promptly and ordered me to cooperate with the family's wishes. She said a green-eyed girl, like me, would go wayward if she didn't get married. Now, I couldn't believe what she was saying. Married? I was just 11. I had never even had a boyfriend. "I don't know anyone to get married to," I said. "I don't want to get married. I have to study." She told me that I didn't have to worry about finding a husband. It was all arranged. There was a nice man who thought I was pretty and had agreed to marry me, and I would be taken to him in Jackson, Mississippi. No, I will not do this. My mother will never agree to this. My grandmother told me that if I didn't do as I was told, my mother would be thrown out of the new home and forced to work as a maid again. "Do you want to see your mother work herself to death?" she admonished. Well, I was then instructed to tell my mother that getting married was my idea, and I would be happy. A week passed, and I thought it had all been a horrible dream. Then Aunt Victoria and my grandmother came and told me to pack my things. They put me in a big black car and drove me to Mississippi. I was introduced to a man I remembered having seen at the house when I sang, and he was about 6 feet tall, thin, and he had a ruddy complexion and dark reddish hair streaked with gray. He was at least 45 or older and smelled of alcohol. All right, so I want to talk about that. You know, there are some issues with whether Lucy was truly 11 or whether she was 13-ish, 13 and a half. Through all the research that was done by a lot of y'all, and I say this not to cast shadow on the book, but to talk about the unimportance of the exactness of it. Okay, we also know that the man was not 45; he was somewhere in his 30s. At least that's what we found doing the research with his birth year and death year. So it's important to notate that it says he was at least 45 or older and smelled of alcohol, because as a young girl, 11, 12, 13, whatever she happened to be, and this is the problem with these French cultures, okay? I did ask Desiree about the potential age difference, and what she said was that that from what she had remembered, hearing her mom talk about that, her sisters she used her sisters' papers sometimes, and her sisters used their papers sometimes because they grew up poor. I think maybe a couple of them were born on a riverboat. So trying to find Lucy DeBarban's birth certificate is but anyways, this is also the memory of somebody that I can't remember certain things in my life when I was younger. Like, I always thought I was younger when my dad remarried after my mom passed away, but I wasn't. I was a little bit older. I think I was 10, and I thought it was 8 or 7. So whether or not Lucy was 11, 12, 13, it's too young to get married. Certainly too young to get married to somebody in their 30s. Okay? And I know that's going to cause an uproar for all the sayers of nay, but I don't care. I really don't care. They can say all the nays they want. I think that everybody that has common sense can, in my opinion, that has common sense and deductive reasoning can see, okay, guess what? This is still a horrible situation. A young girl, 12 or 13, and she still could be 11. I have to say that. She could still be 11 because of how how the censuses ran back in the days. Sometimes you might pretend to be older or younger in order to get more benefits. And I just can't say that I know exactly how old Lucy was. I feel like we'll get to the bottom of it at some point before we're done with this series, before we're done helping Desiree, okay? Because in my opinion, this whole book doesn't hinge upon whether she was 11, 12, or 13. It doesn't. And it doesn't hinge upon, she never said he was 45. She had said he was at least 45 or older and smelled of alcohol. Because this is somebody that had been in the war. This is a man that was a rough-looking man. He had been in World War I. He was probably an alcoholic from everything, all the stories that are talked about in this book. And he surely probably looked older than he was. And I think that's where some of the information comes from in this book. He was to be my husband. I had never been kissed, and now I was to be his wife. I was taken to a wide gray house with tall ceilings and dusty rugs. The man's sister came to stay with me and prepare me for the wedding. She looked like the house, drab and gray. I was taken to a wide gray house with tall ceilings and dusty rugs. The man's sister came to stay with me and prepared me for the wedding. She looked like the house, drab and gray. And she kept asking, "What's wrong with you?" because I was pale and frightened. I was so afraid that I kept throwing up in the bathroom. A second woman, equally unpleasant, came in and handed me a dismal skirt, blouse, and jacket to wear as my wedding gown. I was told that the man didn't want anything special so as not to attract attention. I knew it was because of my age. The women left me alone to dress, and I stared in the mirror, trying to understand why all of this was happening. I kept telling myself that God has a reason for everything. I thought of running away, but where could I go? I was in a strange city, and even if I did try to escape, they would force my mother to go back to work, so I tried to stay strong. I brushed away the tears so that no one would see them. I was taken outside and put in a car between the man and his sister. No one said anything. I remembered that it was raining and dreary, and I was brought before a man dressed in black, a justice of the peace. He mumbled some words without smiling and then ordered me to say, "I do." I did as I was told, with a strange man beside me and two strangers standing behind me. I was married. We were driven back to the house, and the women left. I was alone with a man. That night I tried to stall as long as I could to keep him away. I knew something awful was going to happen, but I didn't know what. No one had told me anything. He had approached me and put his hands on me, and I pushed him away. I ran upstairs and hid in a closet. I got on my knees and begged God to let me wake up from this horrible nightmare. Instead, I heard a loud banging on the door. The voice was angry and cold. "I know you're in there. I'm tired of waiting. You come on out right now." Well, I crawled deeper into the back of the closet. He started banging harder and shouting louder. He began throwing his body against the door, and I was terrified and began screaming. The door burst open. He reached in, dragged me out, and threw me onto the bed. He took off my garments until there was no garments left. I was ashamed. I tried to cover up, but he spread apart my arms, and then he took me. I'll never forget the pain. So Derry writes, to this day, Lucy doesn't realize or has refused to accept the fact that she was sold like a slave to the highest bidder. The party at her house was actually so let me talk about this again, okay? We have weekly conversations with Derry, and this was written a long time ago. But Lucy, to this day, Lucy doesn't realize or refuse to accept the fact that she was sold to the highest bidder. The house was a discreet auction with Lucy as the prize property. Aunt Victoria was probably the wife of a local marriage broker and possibly a marriage broker herself. Lucy's singing performance was geared towards titillating the buyers and opening their wallets. The winner of this auction was Richard Dixie W.D. Ware, an underachiever whose stake came from a family aviation business and some minor real estate transactions. So it didn't say that that's what he did. It said that his stake came from that, the money that he might have had in the family. I believe that through discovery, that he was a mechanic, maybe. Which, the house in Monroe that Ware offered Lucy's family may have been only part of the price he paid for a beautiful 11-year-old thoroughbred. To some, this account may read as though it took place in another century. Actually, such marriages were not uncommon in 1947. The French have a tradition of arranged marriages and refer to them as marriages de convenience. A 1961 study by Wesley D. Camp, Ph.D., determined that French had the highest frequency of marriages in the younger ages of all European countries. In America, the 1980 census reported that among all married women, 3,284,682 were married at age 15 or below. Broken down yearly, the National Center for Health Statistics reports that in 1982, the most recent year it was surveyed, there were 9,214 girls in America who married at the age of 15 or below, including 67 at age 12, 198 at age 13, and 1,498 at 14. No state allows legal marriages below age 12, so there's no statistics for younger ages. These figures don't account for people who lie about their age on their marriage licenses, nor do they include 8 states that failed to report the age breakdowns in their figures. It is also significant that Lucy was brought to Mississippi to be married. In 1947, the minimum legal age a girl could marry with parental consent in Louisiana was 16. In Mississippi, the minimum age was 12. At the publication of this book in 1987, Mississippi had raised the age to 15, 1 year higher than Alabama and New York. If one is inclined to believe that we progressed beyond such archaic practices, consider the turnaround of the state of New Hampshire. In 1925, the minimum marriage age for girls in this forward-thinking state was 18, the highest minimum in the United States. And the age social reformers were pushing for a national law. But by 1987, the minimum age a girl could marry with parental consent in New Hampshire had plunged to 13. So, some statistics there that Derry Matera put in the book. Y'all still with me? It's a bit of a longer read. Try not to yawn. Whew. So, what do we think so far? And once again, I cannot say without a doubt on my side that she was 11 or 13 or 12. She was one of those two ages, according to documents, according to Lucy's memory as well. But Derry also said it's important to say this. To this day, Lucy doesn't realize or has refused to accept the fact that she was sold. And in an interview that I put on Elvis and the Legends, she talked about how something about her age was a little off or something was going on. So, do I know? Do I know without a doubt, and does it matter whether she was 11, 12, or 13? It doesn't matter to me. It might matter to you, but that's why I disclosed it. Because Sandy, who does a great job researching, was pulling up census records. Now, I got no doubt in my mind a young family that would arrange a marriage for a girl to a much older guy that was in his 30s. Well, I don't think he was in his 40s, but in his 30s. A 20-year age difference to a stranger to be taken at force. I got no doubt that they would lie and misrepresent to make money. And if you could do that on the census and get away with it and get more money from the government, they would do it. That's the kind of family that would do it. A family without a father. So let us continue. I remember, this is 1947 to 1953. I remember little of what happened over the next 5 years. I've spent my whole life trying to forget. Every time the man forced himself upon me, it was a nightmare beyond description. I never got used to it, and I couldn't even resign myself to it. Each time I begged God that it would be the last, and it made my skin crawl whenever the man came close. The only thing that saved me was his frequent absences. He traveled extensively on business and was away for months at a time. Someone told me that he had a wife and a family in another city and had spent most of his time with them. I didn't care. I wished he would never come back. Shortly after the marriage, I was ordered to pack my things once again and was sent to live near my mother in Monroe, Louisiana. I was set up in yet another house, a Mediterranean-style home with a large screen porch, and was left in charge of the stern, Brimhilda-type woman, Mrs. Fowler, whom the man had hired to care for me. Spying on me was a better description of her duties. She was a tall, stout, unsmiling woman. Sorry, I lost my place. With thick arms and legs, rough hands, and short black hair. Her mood was soured by the fact that the job of being my overseer took her away from her husband and family in Mississippi. She viewed me as the despised child that kept her from her own beloved children. I was allowed to continue, and no doubt she was forced into that role. So this is a family, it seems to be, from the history of this book, that will sell off as property somebody like Lucy, and that would take somebody away from her children and make it kind of an indentured servitude. Lucy said I was allowed to continue my schooling at St. Matthew's, a local Catholic school. Mrs. Fowler drove me back and forth every day in a big black car that the man provided. I felt out of place at school. I spoke with a heavy French accent, while my classmates were more typical Southerners. Monroe was settled by families that had been in America for generations, and their ethnic origins had blurred. It was so different from the insulated French neighborhoods in Chalmette and Boston. I could barely understand my classmates' slow, thick speech patterns, and they really looked at me like I was someone from outer space. It didn't really matter because I couldn't have any friends anyways. The man had ordered me not to tell anyone about my situation. I wanted to fit in and live a normal life, but it was impossible. I had to miss a lot of school because of my health. The man continued to abuse my body. After one particularly harrowing encounter, I began to bleed heavily. Mrs. Fowler took me to a doctor, a kind man named Glenn Gillespie. He examined me and then told me I was pregnant and had miscarried. He kept asking me my age. Mrs. Fowler had ordered me to say 17. You're nowhere near 17. Tell me how old you really are, Dr. Gillespie demanded, and I was so afraid I kept insisting I was 17 instead of 11. He didn't believe me. Listen, I know you're very young. I don't know what's going on here or even if I can do anything about it, but if you need help or if you have any more problems, come to me. It wasn't long before I was pregnant again, and the man went away for an extended period of time, and by that time he returned, I was showing, and he wasn't as determined. I fought him off long enough to have the child. My first daughter, Deborah, was born 6 days after my 12th birthday. So, remember when I talked about the census and how it showed that Lucy was probably older, at 13 or so, if these years are correct. If these years are incorrect and misremembered in some of her memories, her age could be still 11 when she got married and 12 when she had her first child. That's the difficult part about trying to go back into the 30s and 40s and to try to dive into a woman's mind who, was married to a narcissist, probably. Certainly an abusing person. And so I just have to continue saying, is it really that important if she was 11, 12, or 13? I think it partially is. It's somewhat, but it doesn't mean that the story is not true. It might mean that some of the details are slightly inaccurate, or they could be completely accurate. And that's where you got to make the decision for yourself. So let's continue reading. So she was 12 when she had Deborah, 6 days after her 12th birthday. My second daughter, Melody Charisse, was born 2.5 years later in 1951. So 1949 is when Deborah would have been born. And then, excuse me, Melody Charisse was born in 1951. Life consisted of little more than cleaning the house, taking care of my children, and went out hiding my pregnancies going to school. In the late summer of 1953, the local television station KNOE was auditioning for singers and dancers to be part of a music program. My circumstances had all but killed my dream of becoming a singer, but a few sparks of interest remained. I remembered what my mother told me before marriage. The people who gave her the house wanted to help me pursue a musical career. It was a cruel lie invented by my grandmother, but I could use it as an excuse. I was more concerned with making money than singing, because money was the key to my escape. At the same time, my older sister Mary arrived in Monroe for a visit. Okay, so here's the deal. Lucy had 4 sisters named Mary. So obviously, the one that arrived in Memphis, Tennessee, Mary, was 19, beautiful, and had long blonde hair, like some of the women from my father's side of the family. She was the only sister I was really close to. When I told her about the audition, she built up my confidence and encouraged me to go. I went to the brand new studio and waited with a small group of people for my turn. I sang Spring Will Be a Little Late This Year, and was given the standard, "Don't call us, we'll call you" line. I was crushed. As I was leaving, a man named Pete McCausland asked me to audition for the Mr. Music Show, a hit parade type program KNOE was starting. He needed a dancer, and I was a singer, not a dancer. I was comfortable with the idea of dancing, but I wanted a job. I needed some kind of life outside my home, and the atmosphere of the television studio was enticing and exciting. I told Mr. McCausland that I wasn't sure I could do it, but he just smiled and told me to give it a try. "We'll play the music, just make up a dance to it and practice a while, and we'll come in later," he said. He dimmed the lights, then left me all alone in the empty studio. The darkness made me feel better. See, I could hide. The music, it came out of nowhere. And it startled me. It was a pretty song, the theme from the Italian movie Anna. The stage looked so inviting and magical, I found myself walking out and pretending to be a famous dancer, performing before a large audience. It was fun. Moving my body in sync with the music was exhilarating. I floated around the stage like a swan and really began getting into a spontaneous, free-form dance. I wanted the music to go on, to dance away all my problems. When the song ended, the lights snapped back on and a booming voice filled the large room. "Very good. Excellent." Well, I looked all around, but couldn't see where the words were coming from. "Up here, above you," the voice said. Mr. McCausland and 2 other men were applauding from what I later learned was the sound room. They had been watching my whole silly dance, and I was so embarrassed I could have died. Mr. McCausland came down and said, "Okay, girl, you're hired. You start next week." Mrs. Fowler, my keeper, was now the only thing keeping me from taking the first step in changing my life. I resorted to the oldest form of persuasion in the world, bribery. I didn't know how much the man was paying her, but I figured if I shared some of my salary, she might keep quiet. So I offered her $10 a week, almost half of the $25 a week I was paid, and to my surprise, she accepted. The show and the dancing soon became one of the few bright spots in my life. My day was now full. School, studying, taking care of children. taking care of the children and dancing on the program 2 nights a week. So, can anybody find this show? The Mr. Music Show on KNOE. That's what I want to know. Can y'all find the show? The Mr. Music Show on KNOE. I'm going to look real quick. All right, so I found some stuff that I'm going to share with you right now, okay? So KNOE did open up in 1953, which is where she auditioned, okay, to dance. She really wanted to sing. So think about this. It's a new station. Of course, they're going to hold auditions. So the year matches up in 1953. That's also the part that's coming up in this book, which we'll read next, where she meets Elvis for the first time. Through this radio station, or this TV station, KNOE, okay? Owned by the governor, James N-O-E. That's who owned the station that Lucy auditioned for. So here it is. Here's the information that I found, and then we'll continue. So what you're seeing here is some screenshots from KNOE's 70th anniversary from 1953 to 2023. So certainly, this is some evidence that Lucy's book is true when it comes to the time frame of auditioning for the station and, and the Mr. Music Man show that she danced on. All right, so let's continue now, okay? So she bribed Mrs. Fowler, $10 a week. The show and the dancing soon became one of the few bright spots in my life. My day was full now, school, studying, taking care of my children, and dancing on the program 2 nights a week. I spent what time was left refining my English and trying to lose my French accent. It all worked to occupy my mind and create a life removed from the man. Like a normal 16-year-old, I began dreaming of falling in love. I leaned more heavily upon my faith in God. I can endure anything with His help. Didn't Jesus have to endure suffering? God would find a way to deliver me from my pain. My faith renewed my strength. I was living such a split existence as usual, always coming and going, never getting close to anyone. I didn't want the people at the television station to know about me, so I didn't socialize with anyone there. It was absurd to think that the man would find out. I wouldn't find out. And I dreaded the day he returned, which could be at any time. When he did, he was so withdrawn into his own world that I got by with it. He stayed only 2 or 3 days anyways, and he arrived on the weekends when the live show wasn't on. My deception was effective, and so effective that he began to think that there wasn't enough to occupy my mind. If I wasn't busy, he figured I would do something bad. So he cut the electric cord on the washing machine and ordered me to wash all the clothes and diapers by hand in the sink, extending my work by hours. I hated him even more for this. The scrubbing, harsh detergents roughened my hands and often caused large sores. When I looked at them, I'd run into my room and cry. I wanted my hands to be so beautiful and graceful, so I could use them in my dances. They were the key to my expression. My battered hands came to symbolize all the abuse he inflicted upon me. The sores were like flashing lights, warning me that both my physical and mental well-being were beginning to dissolve under the strain. I had to find some way to escape. My first attempt was a miserable failure. Relying on my faith in God, I went to Monsignor Marsh, a parish priest at St. Matthew's. He had met me in his former attire, a long black robe with rows of covered buttons, red piping, and a black sash around his waist. He had white hair and a flushed complexion. He was the absolute picture of godly authority, and I begged for help. Instead of offering it, the Monsignor coldly turned me away. You don't go to the store, buy a pair of shoes, and wear them, then decide you don't want them anymore, he admonished. But Monsignor, I don't want to be married. I didn't want to be married. I was forced to. I wasn't married in the church. That was your first mistake, he said. You shouldn't have been married outside the church. But that doesn't mean that you can walk away from it. You are married, so go home and be a good girl and stay married. I was devastated. If the church was against me, well, I could never get away. That had been my only hope. I missed the bus home, so I walked in the pouring rain for a long time and ended up at the Protestant church. I stood in the alcove and I cried my eyes out. I would never depend upon or trust anyone again. Well, that knocked me down for a while. It was back to washing clothes in the sink and dreading the moment the man would walk through the door. My only inspiration during those bleak morning hours was listening to Paul Harvey on the little wooden radio on the kitchen table. He spoke of heroes, achievers, and underdogs who fought their way out of dark circumstances. His broadcast gave me the courage that I, too, could overcome my problems. This is Paul Harvey. Good day. I love Paul Harvey myself. The television work was only part-time, and after taking out the taxes and the bribe to Mrs. Fowler, there was only about $10 left each week. I decided to try to get a job at Silverstein's, a large department store that sold the finest clothes in town. I put on my best outfit, a sleeveless black linen sheath covered by a white double-breasted jacket and extended by a white bag and white high-heeled shoes, the first shoes I ever owned. The white gloves covered the sores on my hands, and I was trying to look older and sophisticated so I could fit in at a fancy store. So I bought the clothes with my first few paychecks from the TV program. Important timing here. The TV station opened in September. She probably auditioned in August for the opening of it, or July. First few weeks of her paychecks, she went to work at Silverstein, so probably October, of 1953. Why is that important? It's very important. This establishes timelines here. Like I said, I bought the gloves with my first few paychecks from the TV program. I wanted to save the money for my escape, but somehow the clothes seemed to be a more attainable way of lifting my spirits. Okay. The bold outfit filled me with confidence. I marched into the store and inquired about a job. Fortunately, my interview was with a man, the store manager, Phil Fishman. A woman probably would have seen right through me, but Mr. Fishman, who looked like Tyrone Power, seemed taken by my appearance, but was skeptical about my age. I was 16 then, so I lied and told him 19. Now, is it possible? I'm going to say this again, okay? Is it possible that she knew she might be able to get away with the age 19 sort of a thing because of maybe some of the census records being inaccurate? I mean, she didn't say 18, right? She said 19. Once again, we're back to the age thing, which is not something I brought up during the first reading of this. I didn't really find out till later on through it, and it didn't change my opinion of it. But it's in here a little bit, and it seems like it's Lucy that's bringing it up. Back at the television studio, the star of the program, Mr. Music himself, Maury Toomey. That's who I need to look up, is Maury Toomey. Maybe by finding Maury Toomey, I can find some of these episodes, and maybe we can see. I don't know if they really kept them though. If it's a live show, there probably wasn't recordings. But I'm gonna look into that myself. I did find some other cool stuff though. All right. He kept pestering me to do promotions for the show. Mr. Toomey was tall and handsome, with thick brown hair and a deep radio announcer's voice. His real love was photography, and he was always flashing candid pictures. I was his favorite target. Every time I turned around, there was Maury flashing his camera. He wanted to use me as a professional model, and I wanted to do it, but I was terrified that the man would see a picture. I was taking a big enough risk by appearing on television, but I knew it was unlikely that the man would ever watch the program. A modeling photo could show up anywhere. It was fun dancing on the show. They let me do my own choreography, enabling me to gear my dances to the songs. I floated in the shadows, draped in a flowing dress for one bluesy number, did a fire dance in which the cameraman somehow superimposed me into the flames, put on a straw skirt and did a hula for some Hawaiian songs, and used a giant air fan for a windswept look during a Russian ballet-style dance, performed to the hit love song. One time I even sang the words to Bahia in French while doing a tropical freeform dance. One day while preparing to leave the studio, a number of well-dressed, important-looking men arrived. One of the men, a large, balding, robust man about 55 or 60, introduced himself as James Noe, the station's president, founder, and owner. Noe was also the ex-governor of Louisiana. He said that he had been watching a program and liked the way I danced. He asked me to perform at a big political party they were throwing for VIPs at a ranch somewhere north of Monroe near the Mississippi border. I wanted to say no, but I was intimidated by Mr. No and stammered out an acceptance. There we go, people. Okay? Our ranch, that was a political party in 1953, either October or November. Probably not December, but maybe even December. That was north of Monroe, near the Mississippi border. I wanted to say no. Find it. Find that if you can. Okay? I wanted to say no, but I was intimidated by Mr. No and stammered out in acceptance. On the way home, I was filled with fear. Could I get away? Who would see me? Would the man find out? Maybe he would be there. Despite my misgivings, I had to keep my word. Mr. No was the boss. I loved my job, and I wanted to keep it. Looking back, I probably had no other choice. All the anguished prayers I cried out from upon my knees had finally been heard. In an unexpected way, God had answered. The party would change the course of my entire life. Now, this is Lucy. This is Derry. Just how adept Lucy was at hiding her life and juggling her jobs became strikingly apparent when I attempted to trace her steps by traveling to Monroe and interviewing more than a dozen of her former co-workers. The few old-timers who remember her at KNOE recall little about her other than her appearance on the Mr. Music program. No one there knew she worked at a local store. Those who worked with her at Silverstein's have clearer memories, but were surprised to learn that she was a dancer on television. The show lasted only 6 months. Hardly anyone knew that she was married and had children. Silverstein's had closed, but Phil Fishman still lives in Monroe and remembers Lucy well. She was a very beautiful woman, exceptionally beautiful and very petite. Fishman told me she was deeper and more intelligent than girls her age, but extremely quiet and guarded about herself. No one knew much about her. Mr. Music host Maury Toomey followed his shutterbug fever and moved to Shreveport to become an accomplished photographer of show dogs. Toomey died in 1979, but his partner in Shreveport, Marietta Jones, clearly remembers the stack of pictures from his TV days when he kept in a box in the back of his office. He had lots of pictures of that little dancer, Lucy. I remember distinctly them being her because I thought she looked like CYD Charisse. Side Charisse? Toomey's widow, Nell, said she only vaguely remembers Lucy, but did recall that she worked in a clothing store somewhere. Unfortunately, Nell Toomey threw out nearly all of her husband's old pictures after he died. Gene Milligan, the art director for KNOE at the time, said he and George Lane were probably the other men up in the booth during Lucy's tryout. We watched a lot of ladies in the studio, he said. It was always me, George, and Pete McCausland. He didn't remember Lucy at first, but he did remember the fire dance. I probably used that same gimmick 100 times in my career, he said, explaining how the technique was accomplished. That must have been the first time I used it. We did a lot of crazy things. Now, I could not jog Milligan's memory about Lucy until I mentioned Toomey's active camera. Oh, heck yeah, Lucy Ware, of course. He was always taking pictures of that little gal. He must have taken 1,000. She was a real beauty. I mean, a knockout. She was always with Maury. They were just friends, though. Yeah, I remember that little gal. So, correlations, okay? First off, we gotta believe Lucy danced at KNOE. James No, the governor, the former governor's TV station. This is where, in this next chapter, we got to read it. This is where the next chapter, she meets Elvis in 53, up near the border of Mississippi from Louisiana. Okay? So Elvis didn't have to travel down to Louisiana, did he? He would have traveled. Well, he would have traveled to, perhaps down there. I mean, I'm just saying he didn't have to go all the way down to bottom Louisiana. But we've already established that in 1953, Elvis Presley hitchhiked 250 miles to the Meridian Music Festival, the Jimmy Rogers Music Festival, while he was still in high school, and he stayed overnight there. He had 10 cents in his pocket. That's already been established as fact, okay? This is later. This is after that. He's already branched out and gone somewhere, 250 miles hitchhiking. Why wouldn't he have hitchhiked down here to go do this? Perhaps it was some sort of a contact he made that was a free gig. There's more information, obviously, because Hank Sr.'s widow remembers Elvis and used to give him money down in Louisiana. Fall of 1953. Okay? I followed a homemade map to find the ranch where Mr. No wanted me to perform. It was about a half-hour drive northeast. So a half-hour drive northeast of Monroe. Somewhere close to the Mississippi border. Get your maps out and look, right, folks? The place was like a scene from Gone with the Wind. It was early evening, and the grounds were lit by floodlights that made the weeping willow trees shimmer. Patches of red, white, and pink camellias added color. The white colonial-style house was regal and airy, set off by black shutters and 4 huge white columns at the front entrance that contrasted with the black roof. So it's a white colonial-style house, 4 huge white columns. What does that sound like? That sounds like Graceland, doesn't it? Maybe Elvis. You know, I know that he had his parents go out and look, but I could have sworn somebody mentioned something to Elvis and he told him to go check it out. Or maybe he drove by it. Black roof. A veranda with white rails of delicate lattice work wrapped around both sides and led to a screened porch in the back. There was a lake about 50 yards from the front porch. Graceful swans and ducks glided over the water. There was a temporary stage set up between the house and the lake, and a big bonfire was blazing about 100 yards to the right. People were everywhere, 1,000 or more. Some were roasting wieners in a bonfire, while others ate from the tables of prepared food scattered around the area. It was an older crowd, it says, of politicians and rich businessmen, the kind of people you'd expect Governor No to associate with. I didn't move in those circles, but with so many people, there was a chance of running into someone who knew me. I made myself scarce by walking along the edge of the water. A young man with a bright blue shirt with blue polka dots was staring at me. One of y'all sent me a picture of Lansky's with a bright blue, a shirt with polka dots. I have to take a look and see whether there was white polka dots on it. He acted as if he wanted to approach me and appeared to be struggling with shyness. I ran back to the house, not wanting to wait until he built up his courage. I told the woman in charge of the entertainment that I had to leave early. She said I could go on first, and she told me to put on my costume. Well, my legs were shaking as I took off my red velvet skirt and black decolleté sweater and slipped on my dancing clothes. I wasn't nervous about performing. I was afraid of being recognized and beaten when I got home. My costume was from the television show. Beth Breese, a talk show host at KNOE Radio. Sorry, my goodness. I've been talking for a while reading this here. Beth Breese, a talk show host at KNOE Radio, frequently assisted me with my stage outfits. She helped me design the one I wore that evening. It was for a segment that called for a wilderness scene, so we cut up a white sheet in fringes and added slashes and tears to give me a wood nymph look. It was one of my favorite dances, and it was performed to Anna, the same song they played at my audition. I heard my cue and climbed on stage to do my number. I instantly became oblivious of the crowd as I withdrew into my dance. It felt wonderful again. The rush of adrenaline when performing is a thrill I'll never forget. When I finished, the applause almost... Oh, I'm getting tired. I'm sorry, folks. I'm going to try to push through this. When I finished, the applause almost blew me over. I had never danced before a live audience and was accustomed to the silence of the studio. Now people were clapping and whistling and hollering their approval. I bowed a few times, totally flustered, then ducked back in the house. While I dressed, a haunting voice carried over from the stage area. It sounded like Frank Sinatra. I went to the window to see who was on stage and was surprised to see there was the same young man with the polka dot shirt who had been staring at me by the lake. He sang with such depth and richness it was gripping. I figured that the crowd would really go wild, but the applause was only moderate. It was an older audience, and they didn't appreciate him. I backed away from the window. The young singer's career plight was the least of my worries. Getting out of there as fast as possible was my main concern. I was able to perform because the man wasn't in town. He could return at any moment. If he found me gone, especially at night, a beating would follow. I made my way down to the stairs and rushed out the back door, nearly bumping into someone standing nearby. It was the singer. He was out of breath, and his hair was tousled. He grabbed my arm to steady me. I tried to get by him, but he stood in the way. "I loved your dance," he said, smiling brightly. "I enjoyed your song," I mumbled, still trying to get around him. "You're not leaving, are you?" he asked. "I don't even know your name." "Lucy," I said. "What's yours?" I immediately regretted asking. I had to leave. "Elvis Presley." "What a strange name," I thought. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "I can't," I said, bowing my head to avoid having to look him in the eyes. "Good luck with your singing." I wanted to stay and talk to him. Normally I would have run away, but he seemed so nice, vulnerable even. And there was something about him that was very attractive. His brown hair was shiny and appeared darker because of the balm he wore. I walked through the crowd, saying goodbye to the people who complimented me on my dance. Something made me turn back. The singer was standing there watching me. Our eyes met and he smiled. I smiled back, then turned and walked away. Elvis did not have a band with him. He was singing alone. All the people, the clowns that are out there that are saying that he was with his band back then is ridiculous. This is what Daria wrote. In his early days of 1953, Elvis, then 18, had not yet formed his own style and therefore imitated other successful singers. Friends and associates were often startled at how well he could mimic Sinatra, Dean Martin, and whoever else he wanted to copy. His audience that afternoon was made up of the same generation that would decry him when he became famous. As one old-timer in Monroe told me, nobody who'd been at one of James' nose parties would give a damn about Elvis Presley, famous or not. He could have done his whole Vegas act, and he still would have been booed off that stage. I think that's about all I can do because I'm struggling even reading and talking, so I apologize. But there's a good chunk for y'all. We'll do some more. TCB, TLC, this is Rare Photos. Do some investigating.